Hey guys, Rollout here, and welcome back to Builder's Block for another week. Kind of an interesting vibe today. I built a couple of rando creations before picking up the pace on my final Beyblade Bit Beast. What's different though is that for the first time in a while, I recorded this one all in one take. For a long time, I've been splitting up my commentary into more easily deliverable segments. That way I can avoid stumbling too much or going on wild tangents. But this week, we're doing things a little fast and loose, just like old times. Before we get started though, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community offering thousands of inspiring classes for creators looking to explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. It's curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes so you can keep focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. There are some LEGO-related classes on the platform, but one lesson I recently watched was Logo Design with Draplin, Secrets of Shape, Type, and Color, with Aaron Draplin. I've really been into logo design recently. If you recall, I talked about a different class about something similar last month. This one's an oldie but a goodie. I think it's one of Skillshare's earliest originals, and it's all about designing a personalized family crest. Takeaways about capturing the essence of something with elegant simplicity and making sure your piece looks recognizable and consistent at a glance really resonated with me. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of premium membership, so you can explore your creativity. You've got a lot to learn and nothing to lose, so give it a try and go thank Skillshare for sponsoring this week's episode. Now, on with the show. So I started the week off with a couple of Appetizer builds. I had just come off of building the Gundam Exia, and I knew that I wanted to make progress on Drigger this week. But before I jumped into that project, I wanted to build a couple of palate cleansers, just to get the gears in my brain turning a little bit. So this is an idea I had while building Exia. This is a thought that I had for approaching his swords. Ultimately, it didn't work for that, obviously, but I still think it's a neat idea. So I took 2 Lego katanas and fastened them together with rubber bands, creating a guard, and it creates these cool looking, interestingly shaped swords. And then I wanted to build a character that could hold these. So I built this guy, this skeletal droid. He's got big bony hands. Obviously, I started with those. I made sure that they could wield the swords well. And then I worked from there. I built his spindly body, and then I made his feet and his head kind of match the aesthetic of his hands. And he's kind of an interesting character. He's visually very colorful, I think. Not in terms of actual color palette, but just in terms of character overall. I think he's fun to look at. Here he is holding these swords as I designed him to do, and he holds them pretty well. The thumb is positioned a little awkwardly, but I think it works. It looks good both holding the sword and just having the hands on their own. I think they look fine, even though they're not entirely articulate. I think the feet and the rest of his body is serviceable. Again, like this is just a very simple build, but it gets the job done. There are some really interesting techniques, especially going on in the head, but also in the body. It uses this very interesting connection where you can feed a bucket handle through a robot hand. I don't think that this model takes full advantage of this technique, but I think it has a lot of really good potential for greebling detail. And I'm not sure I've seen anybody pull this off because the connection is like really, really tight. It just barely fits, but I think it's cool that it does. On the next day, I really wanted to build some kind of spaceship, and so I started with that in mind, and eventually it kind of evolved into a mech of sorts. So here it is in like a flight mode with all of these skis towards the bottom. You can see it has a main central turret, a cockpit, and then 2 turbines on the side with little guns on the front of those. This is, again, kind of a spaceship mode, but from here, it can actually stand up, and those boosters can swing out. It's got legs. It's sort of got arms. Again, it's kind of a mech walker sort of thing with flight mobility, of course. It's also kind of, a tank. It's a little Metal Gear-esque in some ways. Here it is at the back. Again, it's got flight potential, of course. I really like all the techniques with the hinges combined with levers to create like piston details. They're pretty limited in articulation, but just visually, I think that's really interesting. And when you move pieces and all of those move and coalesce together, it's really pretty cool. And then here it is with all of the guns kind of positioned in one way or another. You can get some really dynamic things going on with this. Again, I especially love like the pistons in the legs and how those move. Overall, I think it's a pleasing design. The color palette isn't the most interesting in the world. This is basically just 2 gray Lego creations in a row, unfortunately, but I wasn't considering that too much. Again, these were just palette cleansers. I was just kind of building whatever came to mind, and I think both of these creations are honestly pretty cool. But now, let's get to the main course. Let's finally, for real, start working on Drigger. So previously, I'd built his head and kind of a basic structure for his torso, just a mass that had a bunch of studs so that I could attach things to it. On this first day, I decided to build his arms. I really wanted to take this project slowly, just build small chunks of it at a time, sort of pace myself with the overall design of this model. I actually started with his paws specifically, the front paws, because I actually wanted to do something a little interesting here. I wanted the individual claws, the individual toes on his tiger paws to be articulate. And I also wanted them to have kind of a solid mass to them. I didn't want them to be too spindly either. His wrist ends up a little bit thin, but I think it's worth it considering the articulation. And I think it actually turned out pretty well. The overall shaping, I think, is quite readable. And the articulation and expression that this allows is really, really cool, which you'll see in just a moment. The rest of the arm is actually pretty simple. It's got some decent articulation. I tried my best to convey the stripes on his arm to the best of my ability. It also has these spikes on the back of each of his limbs here. Right now, they're pretty loosely connected. I just sort of threw them on. I would improve the way those attached over time. Obviously, this project evolved from day to day. Little tiny things changed all over the place as I built this guy. But here is the claw kind of splayed a little bit so you can see what's going on here. Actually, one of these C-clips in this picture is cracking, is actually nearly broken. Man, those new C-clips are just like kind of a disaster. Like so many of them break so easily and so often. I'm kind of experiencing a sea change where like for the longest time, I really liked the way all of the newer clips looked with their rounded edges and like shiny surfaces, the clip tiles, the vertical clips, and the horizontal clips. I just like the way they look aesthetically, but I am noticing that they just kind of disintegrate. And they crack and they fall apart and they become loose a lot more quickly than the older versions. And so I'm kind of falling out of love with them, and pretty much all of my models now, I kind of prefer to go with the older style clips just because they last longer and they're more solid. But you can see, again, the claw splayed out here. I went on a bit of a tangent there, but I just think it adds a lot of expression to like this feline creation. Like, I think more than any other cat I've built before, Drigger feels like a tiger in just the way he's able to articulate. Because cats have this very like subtle way that they move their paws when they walk. Like, they're very, very light-footed, and it's all in the wrist. And so having this additional articulation in the middle of the paw, so that when he walks, he has kind of a natural movement to his paws, like, it adds so much to his poses and makes him look so much more feline than the larger scale Liger Zero I made in the past, or the Murasame Liger, any of those. Like, he just kind of nails the cat-like finesse just because of the way these paws are designed. I'm gushing a little bit. Maybe I'm overblowing it, sort of. But yeah, I'm really happy with the way that these claws turned out. And you can see, like, they can curl and they can splay out, and they have all this articulation. And I think it's just really, really cool. On the next day, I sort of threw together a lower body. Again, just like the upper body, this was just something that had a lot of studs, that had a little bit of articulation, and that I could attach a pair of legs to ultimately. I also built his tail. It's just a bunch of cylinders connected together with a bit of flex tubes so that it has that natural curl. I think that this is the best way to achieve his tail, especially at this scale, of course. And then I went ahead and built his lower legs, and structurally they're kind of similar to his forelegs. And honestly, I think that these back legs might be a little bit thin. We'll see how I feel about it once Drigger is entirely complete. I got pretty far with him this week, but he's not quite done. And right now I'm thinking that these legs are fine, but once I add his shoulder armor and his overall mass is established, I think I might bulk up these lower legs, but for now, again, I think it's fine. And here he is with all four legs. Here he is starting to actually look like a tiger. And I really like the way that both of these limbs look. The front limbs and the back limbs. I think they got a pretty good relationship. I think the balance of the white and the stripes is pretty decent. You can see that the back legs have a row of spikes, just like the front legs have those two spikes in particular. And you can see that I changed the way that those spikes on the front legs were attached already. They're a lot more solid. In the end, I intend on all three of the spikes on the back legs to be these larger claw pieces. And in the end, they will be yellow as well. I actually don't have any yellow spikes in this shape. So orange is just a stand-in, but even then, I actually ran out of orange ones, so I had to use the smaller spikes, and I just wanted to see how that looked as well. I don't think I like it as much. They will all three be the larger spikes eventually, but this is an option, I suppose. And then on the next day, I decided to flesh out his body, to bulk things up, and I pretty much completely changed the structure of it, including the structure of his upper body, which I had built originally along with his head all those many months ago. And so that means the way his head attaches is a little bit different, and I would change it further still after this as well. I decided that the only bit of articulation he needs in his body is a ball joint. You saw that I flirted with the idea of having two separate joints so that he had a little bit more motion in his waist, but I think the way that his belly armor works if you add an additional joint in his upper body, it breaks that up. It just looks wrong. It looks weird. And so that really needs to be one solid mass. And I think the one ball joint in his midsection is honestly good enough. With this much more bulky body, he is starting to look a bit more like Drigger, I think. Drigger has this kind of hunchback that is supposed to raise up a little bit over his head. Thing is, it is super exaggerated in some poses and at some angles on the Beyblades and in the anime. I've talked about many times before how inconsistent the line art on these character designs are. Sometimes Drigger is just massive, just absolutely like this hulking beast of a tiger. And other times, most of the time really, in the anime, he just has normal tiger proportions, and I sort of gravitated towards that a little bit more, the more realistic tiger proportions with this model in particular. So I think from one perspective, some people might think he's not bulky enough, but from another perspective, I think it's fine. And again, it's just because of the drastic inconsistency that all of these bit beasts have throughout all of the different arts, and even from scene to scene in the anime. So here he is from the rear with all of the legs attached to his much more bulky body, and you can see the hunchback there as well. I'm thinking, again, those back legs might need to be bulked up a little bit, but for now, I'm pretty satisfied with his mass so far. Here he is from the front. I really like the what do you call it? Like scruff, the fur on his chest. The shaping on that, I think, is pretty good. Again, the overall structure of his body is much, much more solid now. Here is how I decided to attach his head with this new design. Because I bulked up his body a little bit, I had a lot more room internally to try some different things. You can see a hinge furthest away from his head here, where it attaches to this golden armor in the belly. That hinge doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't actually articulate. That is just to connect this front section to the back section. It's a snot technique that allows everything to flip around, and it doesn't actually serve any articulate purpose. But I think overall, this design internally is still super convoluted. It's not quite as convoluted as it was a couple of months ago, but it's still way more complicated than it needs to be. And so on the next day, I decided to simplify it, to change the way his head attaches completely. And this is what I came up with. And really, I think it works a lot better. It's a lot more solid. It's far less illegal. And it just makes a lot more sense. So again, it still uses that clip connection so that everything can flip around, but everything sandwiches together with brackets, and then the neck attaches with a T-joint. It still has the same amount of articulation. It can look up and down and side to side, but I just think it's a lot more elegant, a lot more solid, and honestly just looks a lot better as well. I'm a lot more comfortable with this design. And here is what the back looks like with this new design. Again, I had a little bit more room to play around internally. And then I ultimately just decided to change the aesthetic of his like hunchback here just to make things a little bit more blocky and streamlined. I think it fits with the aesthetic of the other bit beasts a little bit better. And I'm just kind of more happy with this visually. Again, it's one of those things where, like, at this scale and in this style, I end up taking some liberties. I have my own stylistic liberties here. It's not entirely accurate, but, Lego is never going to be entirely accurate. It is inherently stylized, and so sometimes I kind of just have to do my own thing and go with what I think looks right, because the details aren't going to be 100% accurate. And so I'm just going to go with what feels right in the end. And so that's what I did here. And I think that this is the most aesthetically pleasing option of all of the different designs that I tried out. I just like how clean and blocky it looks. Finally, here he is compared with Dragoon. Once all 4 Bit Beasts are complete, I will do a grand and glorious 4 Bit Beast group shot. But for now, I just wanted to compare him with Dragoon because I think that this comparison in particular is really interesting. So these two models are actually very, very similar in mass. And I know Dragoon looks a whole lot bigger than Drigger. In this picture, Drigger looks quite small, but their mass is distributed in very, very different ways. Dragoon is very thin, very noodly, and his mass spreads wide, whereas Drigger has a lot of mass in his body, and he's got a lot more depth to him, of course. These two models have a very comparable amount of pieces. They're a very comparable weight to them. Mass-wise, they are very similarly sized models, and Drigger doesn't even have his shoulder pads yet. The thing is, Drigger is like 30% shoulder pads. He has these massive, spiky pauldrons that'll make him look a lot more bulky. And once I build those, I think he'll be comparable in presence to something like Dragoon and to something like Drasil and maybe even Dronzer. Already, even without the shoulder pads, I'm really liking the way all 4 of them look together. So I just need to build really 1 shoulder pad and then mirror it, and then hopefully Drigger will be complete. And I'm really excited to have all 4 of them. I'm really, really looking forward to that because not only will it be the fulfillment of a project that I have been working on for months, I can't wait to have them on display at conventions. Hopefully they are recognized, but then it also means I can put this project to bed and work on other things because I told myself I would not continue building Gundams until I finished Drigger. And I'm really excited to build more Gundams, honestly. So yeah, I cannot wait to have all 4 Bit Beasts done, for multiple reasons. Another sort of cliffhanger ending for this one. I wasn't able to complete Drigger, unfortunately. I know he pretty much looks like a tiger already, but he's got a little ways to go. I've also got a few Bricklink orders coming in, so hopefully I can finish Drigger, the Big Top Burger truck, and then possibly attempt Gundam Dynamis all in one. Special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, especially my leader class patrons, Valraven, Beyond the Brick, and Beta. Until next time, this has been Rollout, signing off.